every Pokemon is made equal, and without some of them, we would see the collapse of the entire world. This wouldn't just be about Rayquaza, who protects the ozone and puts a stop to Kyogre and Groudon's rampage. This also includes Pokemon like Maractus within deserts who serve up seeds for everyone, Cutiefly, who are the top pollinators in Alola, Wishiwashi, who serve as staple prey for anyone looking for a fishy meal, and over 50 other Pokemon necessary to keep this world alive, giving us the Keystone species of the Pokemon world. Howdy there, I'm Curlic, and this is a video I've thought about for a very long time. But before we can work through each of our Pokemon in this, we need to figure out what Keystone species even are. Also, my hair looked dorky without the headband, and if I'm gonna look like a dork, at least I'm gonna look like it without my hair being an absolute mess. In ecology, a Keystone species is a species that has a disproportionately large impact on its environment relative to its abundance. A Keystone species plays a key role in maintaining the health and diversity of an ecosystem and is significant in conservation efforts. It could be a prey species where there's tons of them. It could be something like a wolf, who, there aren't many of by comparison to all other animals by numbers, but the effects of their presence are felt in mass. Now, this idea even extends into more than just animals, but plants, fungi, so on and so forth. In other words, there are plenty of Pokemon that are incredibly rare, such as Snorlax, that have such massive impacts on the ecosystem that they would be considered a Keystone species. As we go through, as always, I'll be trying to tie in real-world information with Pokemon lore while we work through the generations of Pokemon in relative order. So, let's get started. Venusaur is first on our list as the flower releases a soothing scent that attracts Pokemon and calms emotions and can apparently heal the human hearts, because we love nature and that's the truth. More than this though, the entire line of Pokemon is known to be very caring, not just for its own species, but also for other Pokemon. In fact, even its first form, Bulbasaur, is known to be very caring towards babies. This then creates an ecosystem centered around our Planty Frog, as it attracts other Pokemon, then keeps them safe with its actions. This is nowhere near the last Grass-type Pokemon that we'll find in this fashion, as many, if not all, Grass-type Pokemon do play an incredibly vital role together within this world. It's always assumed that the plant life in the world of Pokemon has to grow faster to sustain powerful Pokemon in their diets, but there's actually proof of it. Not in just looking at the world and making assumptions, but instead by looking at things like Gmax Venusaur and even Eldegoss and their dex entries. Gmax Venusaur's pollen is noted to promote plant growth in areas where it lands, and Gossiflor's photo dex from Snap directly states that it uses its cotton to scatter various plant seeds throughout the lentil region to keep it lush and green. These are two prime examples of Pokemon that actually show us that grass-type Pokemon have the capacity to help promote the growth of all plants, not just their own species. And there's one interesting detail about this that would make it so they can not only cross-pollinate with each other, but also all other plants. This detail is knowing that nearly every single grass-type Pokemon is also in the grass egg group, meaning that they can all cross-pollinate, breed, and keep plant life alive and thriving throughout the world. It is easily one of the greatest adaptations in their world and explains so much in such a small detail. Also, this means I got to talk about Eldegoss being a Keystone species a little bit early. Also, the fact that it is a Keystone species specifically in Lentil. We'll talk about other grass types as we go along, but these were very important to talk about now, so that way grass types in general could all be Keystone species if they're the only ones found in their location, or if they're making these massive differences as they provide food and coverage to all other Pokemon within their areas. Rattata is found in every single region except for Galar, Paldea, and Hoenn. It is considered an invasive species within Alola, and it only started thriving in Unova in Black 2, White 2. Nevertheless, it is found on so many different routes throughout the world and serves as an abundant source of food for other Pokemon, such as our birds, snakes, literally anything looking for a 1-foot-tall rat to eat. Not only that though, but they are opportunistic omnivores. They will literally eat anything that they have the opportunity to consume, which of course allows them to be our detritivores. Also, because every time I say that word, there's one person in the comments who likes to be rude in regards to how they correct me. Detrivores and detritivores are both accepted words. I love being proven wrong when applicable, but the people who correct me on pronunciation are always a 50-50 shot on being rude about it for some reason. Don't know what it is. Back on track though, this makes Rattata amazing for making sure that the world is cleaned up, while also serving as a bottom line common food source for many other Pokemon. But it may go further than this, as not only are they serving these two aspects, but considering Rattata does fit both mouse and rat niches, it may even be helping pollinate or helping disperse seeds, both by accident. In fact, it is consistently accepted by many professionals that at the very least, mice are a keystone species within nearly every single ecosystem. Remove them, and we will see a massive collapse in population of not only animals, but also plants. So maybe the next time we run into a Rattata on the route, we'll still dust them, but at least we'll know deep down inside our hearts that we dusted a keystone species. Also, Mousehold should also be included here for the same exact reasons altogether, especially since it has population bomb and they spread their kind all over the place a lot faster and easier. Speaking of Pokemon with high populations and high encounter rates though, let's talk about Zubat. It gets a bit of a weird mix of inspirations that you may not want to call it then a keystone species, as it relates better to the vampire bat. Vampire bats themselves are considered important in their ecological roles as they feed on weaker creatures and help with biodiversity, but they aren't quite hitting the same exact niche that other bats would, so they're not really keystone species. This is all because vampire bats exclusively feed on blood, whereas many of our other bats cull the populations of insects, especially mosquitoes, or they even feed on fruits, making them another vital creature for spreading seeds and even fertilizer, if you catch my drift. And it is through this connection of bat guano and Zubat living in caves that I say Zubat is still vital and necessary for cave life as a keystone species. You can probably put a counter for how many times I'm going to say keystone species. I'm not going to do it, have fun. But from Bat Conservation International, I have the following. The bits of insect shells found in guano are rich in elements like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, all important for plant growth. Nitrogen promotes the growth of green stems and leaves, while phosphorus supports roots and potassium helps with producing flowers and fruit. Beyond gardens, nightly bat flights help distribute these important fertilizing elements throughout the landscape. Thousands to millions of bats pooping while they fly across forests and fields results in a salt shaker effect of free fertilizer. Bat colonies also help fertilize their roost trees, and some pitcher plants in Southwest Asia have evolved mutually beneficial relationship with bats, providing a safe place for bats to roost in exchange for a bat poop boost. It's like a nutrition shake. Around sunset, bats living in caves around the world will begin their exodus into the skies in search of food, but many cave-dwelling critters will never leave the relative safety of their cave world. Many of these troglobites, including mites, beetles, isopods, and flies, rely on guano as a source of food. In turn, these animals form the foundation of a guano food pyramid, eaten by predators like whip scorpions, spiders, and just regular scorpions. Some vertebrates also rely on the environment created by guano, including some salamanders and frogs. Protecting bats at their caves also means protecting and conserving these fragile cave ecosystems. So when we look at cave life in Pokemon, we find creatures that do benefit on this through the Paris line, who relies on healthy tree roots to survive, which may in turn be eaten by Sandshrew. I've also made claims through my ecology series that we have evidence of Chingling eating Zubat and bird Pokemon such as Hoothoot, but I'll let you watch those videos to get a deeper explanation there. Other Pokemon who benefit off of the fertilized fruits from Zubat's guano would include Pokemon such as Machop, Mankey, and Kangaskhan outside of the caves. Even in some places, we'll find Rhyhorn, who feeds as any other rhino would on the grassy grounds. Zubat's incredible abundance is very clear now, and by full extension, we can absolutely say the Woobat line would be just as vital. At the end of the day, I just also really personally love bats. Back when I worked at a state forest, I pointed out a bat house just lying in our workshop, and I was grateful to have a ranger that listened to me and took charge so we can raise that thing up. And it took a lot of work. It was 10 feet tall, but it's something I'm very grateful to have been able to do. Diglett might be one of the first keystone species that we are made directly aware of ever since the first generation. As they make their homes throughout the region, digging through the ground, they serve two purposes. One is that they're very clearly aerating the soil, meaning that they're disturbing the soil in ways to introduce air into it. This is important for plants as they need a combination of air, organic matter, soil, and water in order to grow properly. Each plant's needing different levels or percents for each. But the other purpose that Diglett serves is something told directly to us in the manga, games, and the anime. They poop, and those droppings are amazing for soil as they help provide nutrients, just the same as the bat guano we just talked about. It's actually even more specifically stated that Diglett perfectly tills the soil and that farmers delight in them because they leave droppings in their wake that enrich the soil. This extends further into their Alolan counterparts, as Alolans are so grateful for a number of traits that Alolan Diglett and Alolan Dugtrio have. This includes the traits we already discussed, as they make agriculture much easier on these islands. They help make the soil good enough for agriculture where it otherwise is more difficult, and of course they associate their behavior and looks, specifically with Dugtrio, with a benevolence, a creature that warns them of disastrous volcanic eruptions soon to come, and is then even being considered a deity of the earth. Also, anytime I talk about better soil, I want you to always remember all of the grass-type Pokemon that need good soil in order to thrive, since at the very least, many of their first stages will still plant their roots into the ground for nutrients and water, like Bellsprout or Oddish. Following Diglett is actually the Pokemon that Diglett relies on for its primary habitat when not above ground, which is Onix. Now, this stone snake is a creature that is not supposed to be an abundance creature in terms of numbers. It isn't necessarily a danger, but they're just so large that there can only be so many of them at a time, or the world won't support their mineral-absorbing bodies. As they dig through the earth, you might know that they make homes for Diglett, but it actually makes homes for far more Pokemon than just that Pokemon. We find them in every region except Hoenn, Alola, and Paldea, but they are found in a large number of caves throughout the remaining regions. The only downside is that none of the caves or tunnels attribute themselves directly to being made by Onix, yet many of them still say they were made naturally, which, Onix is a natural creature. And while we find Onix deep within these caves, we also do find them at the ends of tunnel paths, such as when in Glittering Cave within Kalos, really showing us that they're the ones making these habitats. One of the best examples of this is actually within Sinnoh's Iron Island, where the deeper you go, the higher the percent chance you have of running into an Onix. This means that their population count is increasing from 10% to 20%, or even 30% if you look at the Platinum or Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl remakes, and then eventually we start seeing Steelix deep within these caves. Throughout this process, they're making homes for Zubat, Golbat, Geodude, and Graveler as some of the most common examples. In other caves, we might see the Aeron line, Mawile, Sableye, and any other Pokemon that's gonna chomp on some rock for nutrients. This would be because Onix will expose ores, since they don't actually seem to care what they absorb into their bodies, just as long as they absorb something and then continue hardening their exterior and polishing it until they evolve into Steelix naturally. Because, as opposed to slathering their bodies in metal coat and just letting them sit in the sun or something. So as long as there are tunnels, we can assume that at least some of them were created by Onix. I almost skipped Staryu and Starmie, but after digging into them further, I found out that starfish in general are considered keystone species. But why? And how does that translate to these old big sea stars? Starfish are natural predators of various marine organisms, including mussels, barnacles, and sea urchins. By preying on these species, starfish help prevent any single species from dominating the ecosystem, which can lead to overgrazing and depletion of essential resources like algae and seagrass, which means lower levels of oxygen in the water. But we really don't get to see this within Pokemon, do we? No, instead the only thing that this line eats is noted to be plankton. And that's not even Staryu, but rather only Starmie, for whatever reason, is the one that specifically notes this. In antithesis to this, though, Lantern and Luminion are noted to be natural predators of our starfish, while also competing with each other for this scrumptious meal. And this is where we realize why they're vital, because these starfish do not care at all about having their limbs eaten, just as long as their core is left alone. This could likely be said about many other Pokemon that may try to eat Staryu, which would be other creatures that like to live on the sea floor, or even on the deep sea floor. We know this not only because Luminion and Lantern are noted to be Pokemon that do live in those areas from descriptions, but we are literally shown this in Pokemon Snap. More than this though, we see other Pokemon reach these deeper zones, such as Frillish, Golisopod, Tentacool, if you lead it down to have a ballroom dance with said Frillish, and finally a Clampearl. All Pokemon that could be chewing on some starfish arms. At the end of the day, this makes Staryu and Starmie incredibly vital for supporting the diets of other Pokemon and reducing conflicts within the ecosystem, with, of course, exception to the ones that do get over-competitive over a starfish being one of their favorite treats. Not just one, but both Magikarp and Gyarados are important for the ecosystem. On one hand, Magikarp is incredibly easy to explain, as it is yet another staple food for Pokemon such as Pidgeot. And don't let the anime fool you, Magikarp itself is still considered edible, and considering their incredibly high numbers, they are the Rattata of the sea. And oceans and lakes, they really are just everywhere. They are in every single region within the wild except Unova, and are on multiple routes within each of those other regions. I've talked about this in other videos, but if Magikarp were to follow the Asian carp in real life that did become an invasive species within New York, then all it needs is to escape the wildlife reserve, the same as it did in the real world. If a black and white third game does not have a Magikarp escaping into the wild, I will sacrifice one of these Gengar plushes to my dog, and trust me, he's learned Crunch. It is not surviving. But while Magikarp is often considered an incredibly weak and pathetic Pokemon, as stated directly by the Pokédex, we have Gyarados serving up an opposite role from prey on the other side of the spectrum as a predator. This massive monster is something that is rarely seen in terms of rates or encounter rates, and even then is considered a massive threat that you usually don't want to see at all in the wild. This because, as you likely know, Gyarados is a great destroyer. Once it begins its rampage, it will destroy entire villages, mountains, terrains, and once it is done, then the area will look massively different and it will leave the area. Even when it isn't on a rampage, it's eating nearly every single other water dweller that it comes across and can still shape the geography of the area just by zooming past it. With it now serving as the top of the food chain, Gyarados is that upper limit, that ceiling, that makes sure that Pokemon such as Sharpedo don't completely take over. But it also makes sure that any other Pokemon that's able to breed like rabbits isn't able to take over the waters either, because that's just as dangerous. Imagine Route 25 in Kanto for me, within Fire Red, Leaf Green, a route that has Poliwag, Poliwhirl, Magikarp, Goldeen, Psyduck, Slowpoke, and of course Gyarados. Left to their own devices, I want to single out Goldeen, who is aggressive and will absolutely take over an area. In fact, when we look at the Heart Gold and Soul Silver games, we actually do not see Gyarados, and instead now see higher populations of Goldeen and Seaking. So much so that they make up the majority of the fishing rod encounters and 100% of these surfing encounters. And this is my favorite thing to see when digging through Pokemon ecology, seeing that even from older generations through remakes into newer generations, we can find these ties and see how the region has changed. These clues and ideas that show ecology is a major drive behind these games, and it's so often missed by other theorists and Poketubers. I genuinely need to also just make a deep passion video all about Pokemon and ecology, just the concept itself. Nevertheless though, Gyarados is our eco reset button. The Pokemon that appears when Magikarp has reached its own maximum capacity, or they have received enough abuse from predator Pokemon or reached max abundance to then cause them to evolve. And then Gyarados comes in like a natural forest fire and boom! Back to the Stone Age with ya boys! So yeah, I'd say these guys are Keystone species through and through, Magikarp serving as a bottom and Gyarados serving as a top. Not in that way, you pervert. But before we do continue on to our next entry, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying so far, subscribe, because there are weeks worth of deep dive content just like this on this channel that you're not getting anywhere else. In addition, let me know your favorite water Pokemon, because I never really hear people talk about those. Personally, if I'm not allowed to pick Suicune, then I'm probably going to go with Golisopod, the Ronin Poli. In addition, I want to say thank you to members of the channel. They help boost the channel immensely, as I am a one-man show for all of this that you see. If you want to get behind the scenes info, early access to videos, and members exclusive videos, become a member for as little as $3 a month. But enough of all that. Once again, thank you for watching, and on with the video. While all three of the legendary birds are vital, Moltres, unfortunately, doesn't even come close to making the same directly observable impact that Articuno and Zapdos do in their environments. It's not to say that Moltres doesn't make a big difference, it's just that Moltres likes to sit inside of Victory Road, deep inside of mountains, or deep within a volcano, and it's just not dramatically changing the environment as much as it is just making a nice home and encouraging the environment to stay fresh and alive. So instead, we're starting with Articuno. we can look at the Seafoam Islands and the strange fact that they are effectively a frozen paradise for Pokemon like Seal and Shelder. But it also encourages populations of Slowpoke, Horsea, Krabby, and Staryu to come here alongside a number of other Pokemon. The environment is perfect for them, as each Pokemon manages to evolve with the exception of Staryu, which, to be honest, do kinda just get washed in here by accident. After all, they can't call back to their family in the starves of space if they're stuck inside a cave, so of course this wouldn't be their ideal environment. It might just be a short-term shelter. We get to see all of these other evolutions and rise in populations of Pokemon like Dugong, Slowbro, Golduck, and Kingler as they move deeper and deeper into the Seafoam Islands. And at some versions of these islands, we even get to run into Jinx, also known as the Snow Queen in Galar. Also love to see how Psyduck evolves into Golduck here, because the cold helps with their headaches. But at the end of the day, the deeper we go, the colder it gets. The higher level the Pokemon are, up until we reach Articuno at the very bottom of the cave, an entire 4 layers beneath the earth itself. It has gone as far as creating frozen pillars of water and icy stalactites for its home. Without Articuno, the Pokemon we find here would not be here at all, and would likely just be out there in whatever Pokemon's version of the Arctic actually is. It's out there, we just haven't seen it. On to Zapdos. This is my favorite of the legendary bird trio. I even love that its Galarian form is a Roadrunner mixed with a few other potential traits. But with Zapdos here, I would argue it creates one of the most unique environments of all with its presence. We find it within the abandoned power plants of Kanto, and it's also here that we find a ton of electric Pokemon such as Pikachu, Electabuzz, Electrode, Magnemite, and their naturally spawning lines. These Pokemon all need electricity, and in fact I've confirmed that Magnemite, Voltorb, and Electabuzz lines can feed entirely on electricity for sustenance. Meanwhile, Pikachu uses it as a fuel source for their electric organ and attacks rather than food. But how are these Pokemon getting power in an abandoned power plant? A place that should have zero energy coursing through it? Well, our answer lies within the Pokemon Adventures manga, where we get more story on what this plant was, and it was literally abandoned in the middle of construction. For whatever reason that may be, the plants during construction and after construction continued to pollute the area and harm the lives of Pokemon all around it. This is why we see Grimer and Muck here within the games, because of the pollution. But again, there shouldn't be any power being supplied to or from this place, meaning that the only reason electric Pokemon are gathered here is because deep within this plant is the mighty Zapdos. This Pokemon having so much electricity inside of it that it's been able to release energy freely to supply the Pokemon here with their necessary power. It's actually very, very interesting that Zapdos can just do this and still continue to have a ridiculous amount of power left within it. And it's easy for it just to replenish its power even if it runs low, as it could just let loose a bit of lightning into the sky, induce a thunderstorm, get hit by lightning generated by the planet, and get refueled. And it theoretically should math out to Zapdos getting a net positive charge every single time. Were Zapdos not to be here within this power plant, then the ecosystem that is here simply would not exist at all, explaining why Zapdos really is a Keystone species in this very unique environment. It should be no surprise that the mythical Mew would of course be a Keystone species, but I already hear you in the comments. Just because it's the ancestor of all genetic Pokemon doesn't mean that it's a Keystone species. That's not how that terminology works. Rather, the only reason we know that Mew is a Keystone species is because of the movie Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. A movie that had its own massive tree of life composed of jewels, memory flowers, held ancient Pokemon deep within its body, and was even guarded by the Reggie trio. This tree only exists within the movie, but there were origin stories for the world of Pokemon and legendaries that were scrapped that did involve a tree of life, it being cut down or repurposed, or even being split up to make up Hoenn's legendary trio. And I know it gets wild, but I've talked about all of that and more in a trio of videos known as the Forgotten War of Pokemon and the Dead Giants of Pokemon. But back on track, we find out that this great tree and Mew are symbiotic with one another in a very loose way. But we learn this the hard way, as when Mew uses up too much power, it begins to weaken, and in turn the tree itself begins to collapse and die. This entire ecosystem of creatures within it scramble as the land itself falls apart. The environment melts away, and death is closing in on both Mew and the tree. This is only prevented through Lucario giving all of its life energy to Mew to restore it to health, thus causing Lucario to pass away in Mew's place. The hardest part is knowing that there is no genuine scientific explanation that I can give here, because while symbiotic relationships exist, there's nothing in this world that will die at the same exact time as something else just because object or creature 1 died. And at the same time, this is clearly important because this tree housed the beginning of life and continues to house multiple ecosystems of Pokemon, showcasing a hidden importance of our very mysterious Mew. Sunkern, Sunflora, and Sunflowers are all keystone species in their environments. Sunflowers themselves provide a ridiculous number of seeds, being 1,000 to 2,000 seeds per flower head. That isn't saying per flower body, the entire plant, that is per head. And while humans might like to crack them open and eat the seeds on the inside, I want you to think about just how many animals will sustain themselves on these seeds. We're talking about more than just birds and mice. I'm even talking about black bears who will mow down some seeds because of their fat and caloric content. After all, gotta build up those fat storages before winter hits. How this is reflected in Sunkern specifically is that we are not only told that they are directly targeted by bird Pokemon such as Spearow, but also have a massive boom in population after a year with a particularly cold summer. Yet at the same time, they only sustain themselves entirely on morning dew and sunlight, making them very low maintenance. And of course, finally, they directly state that it tries to move as little as it possibly can. It does so because it tries to conserve all the nutrients it has stored in its body for its evolution. Finally, it was even designed to be eaten, as all it does when a predator comes after it is wave its little leaves around to scare it away, which of course may not work in the slightest. So yeah, super easy to target species, packed full of very, very healthy nutrients, and has incredibly high populations after harsher, colder summers where many animals may need the extra help to repopulate. Easy and perfect ties to understand. Alright, I'm only considering Slowking here because at least within the anime it is very clearly expressed how stupid other Slowpoke in particular are. They are in fact too stupid to even follow a slowly disappearing water source that is vital for their livelihood. I mean, I still love them, but they're very dumb. They literally watch water disappear over the course of days, weeks, maybe even months, and just do nothing. The only way to save their species was to evolve one of them into a Slowking that could then lead them and tell their asses to get into the freaking cave where all the water was going away. And in case you're wondering, yes, an ecosystem could be as small as 1 or 2 animals because of their effect on plants, fungi, and even microorganisms that would be found in an area that make up the rest of a present ecosystem. I just have no way of actually telling what's really in that cave without a ton of unnecessary speculation, but we're gonna try anyway. They're probably dragging in more sand and seeds if I really had to guess, which would eventually help bring more life and land to the cave, pushing water out slowly over generations. Then their populations would come back out of the cave with the help of a Slowking, maybe, or just being forced out of it. From there, the whole cycle would repeat, as the cave would have its inner soil eroded away, water would go through it, and then they'd need a Slowking again, explaining the legend carved in stone there, but that's just a theory. I'm not saying the phrase. I liked Matt Pack too, but I'm not saying the phrase. I'm oddly very excited to talk about Ursaring, and it might be just because I'm starting to realize just how much I really like bears. Which is ironic since I have an Everything is Weak to Bear piece of merch that was created thanks to a certain Empoleon Ursaring fusion that swept house in a game years ago. God, that is actually really weird to say now. There is a history to this channel, and it only gets longer and more robust as it goes on over multiple years. And anywho, before I feel the sands of time grinding away at my existence and I realize my fleeting mortality, Ursaring is doing exactly what any other bear will do, eating berries and other fruits. Honey as its favorite food, digging up buried food, hunting Magikarp and other fish in the streams, you name it. I actually love, though, that the Dex entries focus on Ursaring eating more berries and fruits, or digging up buried food, because bears will eat way more of those amongst nuts and seeds than they will meat. They do a ton of foraging on an omnivorous diet because in order to easily survive winter, you might as well just eat everything you come across. Through this process, they are contributing to seed dispersal, nutrient cycling, pooping, and plant diversity through their foraging behavior. Bears also help control herbivore populations, which prevents overgrazing and allows vegetation to thrive. This means those dang old deer won't have as much of an absolute boom in population and invade other spaces to outcompete other animals, which, yes, that is absolutely a thing. White-tailed deer in particular will have high populations and spread out far and wide, even becoming invasive species in some areas. But if you want more on invasive species, I have a whole new compilation video that includes them, migratory Pokemon, and parasites. Not to overly promote other videos, but, you know, they're there. I'll get mating rituals in there one day because nobody else has the balls to do it. Another grass type makes its way over as the entire Treecko line serves as a forest guardian, only being stronger as it evolves into Grovyle and eventually into Sceptile. But this trait is not why I want to talk about them, and we'll get to it soon. We have Treecko, who never backs down from a fight, Grovyle, who is noted to already be incredibly speedy even within the jungles, and then Sceptile, who is agile enough to be considered an unmatched species in its abilities. These thin-leafed lizards do hunt other Pokemon for prey, meaning they're likely going after lots of invertebrates like crickets and moths when available. But in turn, not only do they protect the forests, but they nourish the forest through the use of Sceptile's seeds, and this is what makes them a Keystone. Considering its conifer-tailed aesthetic, it's fair to assume that just like with conifer needles, this line's way of helping the forest is by introducing a slew of nutrients to the soil via the little buds that they have on their bodies to encourage overall health and growth. Pine needles in specific retains soil moisture, suppresses weeds, makes things a bit more acidic, and then, here's where the seeds pop in, primarily provides nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to the soil. Give those in the right amounts and they're massive for plant growth, as we discussed earlier. Too much, and that's an entirely different story that I spent 2 years studying and testing firsthand with stream water. This contribution to the soil is likely a massive hidden reason as to why, once again, we see such lush lands in Hoenn, a place that is known to be more humid and warmer overall. A place perfect for a creature based on the Anole lizard, and perfect for creatures that can hide and provide back to their homes. Lotad, I will admit, is less of a keystone species and more of an indicator species, but I wanted to include it here, which, oh god, I just realized I could have a whole other video on that, because keystone and indicator species might have some crossover, but they are going to be mostly separate. And to explain that as a tangent, a great short example would be certain types of snails. The ones that do not close their shells with their bodies are more sensitive to the quality of water and won't survive, making them an indicator species. In addition, a lower, more acidic pH will cause their shells to wear away and leave them defenseless. And an opposite to this at the same time, not every snail is a keystone species, making it so that they might be a good indicator of water quality, but not be the backbone of an ecosystem. On these same lines, I would argue Lotad is less of a keystone and more of one of these indicator species that tells us the quality of the environment. But I know one of you would be asking about it because I sat here wondering if it should be included, and so here we are with this very long explanation. Lotad's primary purpose is as any lily pad would be, while also serving in its evolution of lumbre as competition to birds as they eat seeds and plant life. Meanwhile, specifically as Lotad, its lily pad is going to provide structure and oxygen to the water. But more than this, Lotad is blue, which sounds really stupid at first, but its blue color allows it to blend in with the water as it floats along. This then makes it less visible to predators, but not invisible, so it has to move slowly and carefully with those little adorable nubs that it has, all 6 of them. But then this also explains how smaller prey Pokemon are able to take a ride on the Lotad Express Ferry and safely get to the other side of a body of water. They, just as real lily pads, fill in this interesting niche of giving a hiding spot from underwater predators looking for an easy meal that flounders on the water as it swims, and instead they just ride on top of a lily pad, jumping from one to the next even. I do also want to clarify at this point once more, in the right environment, nearly any single species can become a vital keystone species, and even if they aren't, they are still important to an ecosystem in ways we may not fully understand. As such, I am confident there is at least one species of lily pad somewhere out there that is considered a keystone species. I think a really good example is I also spent a lot of time studying spotted knapweed, an invasive species within the Americas, but a vital plant within places such as Europe last I checked. It is outcompeting and dangerous here as it has built-in deep tunneling roots that take in water where other plants can't reach their roots, and also releases an herbicide that kills other small plants, invasive. But in Europe, it is neither nearly as aggressive nor as dangerous because there are animals that eat it, and it is incredibly important for bees, making them have two entirely different status labels on them, though it may not be keystone. So I can essentially guarantee you that I will miss a Pokemon or will have found a species that is a keystone that we can tie to a Pokemon. So if there's anything you want to add in the comments, I greatly encourage it because I love reading those comments that expand on what I'm talking about or tells me anything that I missed. Sharpedo, while incredibly powerful and dangerous within the water as previously mentioned, is still a keystone species similar to how we talked about with Gyarados earlier. They help control the balance of an ecosystem through control over abundance, diversity, and distribution of prey species. Oh man, it's February, you know what that means? It's love disc season, baby! Eat those bad boys up in their massive swarms and fill your stomachs! While that's a bit of a joke, it's also 100% true. Any animal, including ourselves, are going to go after the easiest and most abundant target available to us. This reserves energy, saves on time, and we can eat until our stomachs are fit to burst, just so we can last longer when it might be a few days or even weeks before we get another meal, and all that fat is stored in our body for long-term energy. So when a group of animals start to accidentally make themselves obvious by breeding too much, they also serve as a giant neon sign to predators in that area that can then swoop in and cut down their numbers before they become a problem. This actually even extends to weak or sick fish, as sharks are going to have different resistances that allow them to eat those sorts of fish and be just fine. This in turn prevents these fish from spreading any sort of disease to plants or others of their kind, or even creating a much larger unseen issue that could affect other types of fish, hurting populations rather than controlling them. Kind of makes the idea of a nurse shark a bit more funny if you ask me. Hey nurse, my fin isn't working, can you check it out? Yeah, sure, whatever, take this salt and pour it all over yourself. I don't see how that helps me at all, Ness. It doesn't. I just know from the looks of you, you're gonna taste like that sea cucumber I ate last week. I bet you would have never expected to see Castform on this list because you think they aren't a naturally occurring species, but they must be at this point in time as we find a completely wild one within Alola that helps Totem Lurantis within the lush jungle. Even if it's not naturally occurring, they are out there in the world and are affecting it. This Castform that is within the lush jungle serves a very simple role in helping control the weather. As a Pokemon capable of unleashing isolated weather effects, it's shown using Sunny Day to aid the Lurantis and even become a fire type to fight off offenders, but there's definitely more to it. This Pokemon also has access to Rain Dance, allowing it to carefully assist with watering and bringing sunlight to our little jungle to help promote growth of not only the plants, but also to the plant Pokemon and the many species within the jungle that rely on them. This extends to mushrooms like Parasect and Shiinotic, Sudowoodo who can't get too wet, Comfey who needs flowers as part of its symbiotic nature, and so many more that do live here. I actually want to extend this out to Lurantis' other summon, being Trumbeak, showing just how vital both Castform and Trumbeak are as it calls to them for help. Trumbeak in particular within the jungle and any other place really is a Pokemon that uses seeds as a form of attack after it has eaten fruit. This then makes it easy to draw a tie that shows us Trumbeak being a seed spreader throughout the jungle, encouraging new growth throughout the years as old growth either continues to grow, get eaten, or die away, all with the support of Castform and many more minor roles played by all the other Pokemon here. Lush Jungle is another one of my favorite places throughout all of Pokemon because of how clear they make the ecology work, and all we have to do is look with wide open eyes to see it. Then again, all of Alola really is that way, so it becomes a no-brainer as to why I find Alola to be one of, if not my favorite region of all time. Corsola as a, well, I would have said living coral, but all coral is living since they have coral polyps that build them up and everything, but that's neither here nor there. Instead, it is very important to see that Corsola is very much a keystone species within Pokemon, just as coral itself is. In fact, this is another species that we get to see the greater impact of when it disappears, as when in Galar we see that Corsola has died and comes back as bleached coral in its regional variant. And by Arceus, this is one of my, if not my favorite regional variant. It's so depressing, but also so cool at the same time. Coral itself in the real world provides homes and structure to many different underwater creatures. They are noted to support over 25% of all marine life, while also covering less than 1% of the ocean floor. So if that isn't a disproportionate way of providing life while being in comparatively small numbers, I don't know what is. They are the homes of species, they are the anchor, they bring biodiversity, and they are amazing. And once again, I can hear you saying, but how does that relate to Pokemon? Well, it is specifically noted that smaller Pokemon, such as Horsea and Lovedisk, make shelter in Corsola's branches, they even use them to hide from foes. In addition, large groups of Corsola serve as a literal base structure that is so large in some cases that people can live on top of them, as we see within Pacific Log Town in Hoenn. A habitat like this must have existed one time long ago in Galar, but due to the shifting climate, it caused all the Corsola to bleach and die out. This not only affected habitats and shifted the species that could survive here into being only the hardiest of species, but also changed the diets of Pokemon such as Mareanie. Mareanie was introduced to us as the Corsola Hunter, a Pokemon that exclusively ate it. But when we remove Corsola's vibrant colors and nutrition by having its Galarian variant, we see a shift in diets and behavior in the Mareanie line. Instead of hunting Corsola, it's hunting Pokemon such as Pincurchin, which even tells us further that Mareanie and Toxapex are hunting Pokemon whose bodies hold higher amounts of calcium. But that is neither here nor there. Instead, again, I love that we can very easily see these effects and changes within Pokemon's world that actually reflect our own world. The great banana sauropod itself, Tropius, has arrived. You might already know this one, but Tropius is noted to not only be a frugivore, eating exclusively fruit, but whatever biology it has going on allows it to actually grow its favorite fruit upon its body. It's not stingy about its fruits either, meaning that it will openly share them with other Pokemon interested in them. This is another one of my favorite adaptations in all of Pokemon, because this is an incredibly ancient species, or at least we can assume as much when we look at a piece of TCG art that shows Tropius living amongst other ancient prehistoric Pokemon. On one hand, it's helping other Pokemon get their fill of food, but I think Tropius is far more vital towards the survival of things like bananas and other tropical fruits, because why else would this Pokemon that is within both the monster and grass egg groups in that order be able to grow fruit? I'm going to claim that it's just another way for the genes of our plants and our animals to cross with each other and provide a better way to resist the many diseases and viruses that would exist. And what better fruit to be primarily depicted on Tropius than the banana for this exact thing? A disease would break out in history against the Gros Michael, often called the Big Mike banana, which was the primary export banana until the 1950s, prized for its rich, creamy taste, thick peel, and resilience during transport. It originated from Southeast Asia and was brought into the Caribbean by French naturalist Nicolas Baudin, and later introduced to Jamaica by botanist Jean-Francois Poyat. I don't know how to say these names, and I'm just going off the wing. Gros Michael bananas were widely cultivated in Central America, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia, dominating global exports and accounting for over 70% of banana trade in the early 20th century. That's the 1900s for you, baby. The decline of Gros Michael was primarily due to Panama disease, a soil-borne fungal infection caused by Fusarium oxysporum FSP cubense race 1. This fungus attacks the plant's vascular system, causing wilting and death. The monoculture cultivation of Gros Michael made it highly vulnerable, and by the 1960s, vast plantations on Honduras, Costa Rica, and other regions were devastated. The commercial extinction of Gros Michael led to the adoption of the Cavendish banana, which was resistant to race 1 and became the standard export variety. In other words, we get rid of the middleman. The banana no longer grows entirely through soil and isn't forced to stay in one area. It gains resistances and continues to serve as a plentiful and nutritious food source for many Pokemon. It poop out the seed, but instead of pooping out the seed, it's on its body, and then other Pokemon from all over that are friendly will then eat the banana and then poop out the seed. Tropius itself deserves so much more love because of all of this. It's a genuine marvel and fun to talk about speculative science regarding it. Latios, and by theoretical extension, Latias. Sorry. We watched the Two Heroes movie in the Discord. If you're not in the Discord, join the freaking Discord. We're watching the movies every week, and there's other fun stuff that happens every once in a while. And of course, because of the people that I attract being similar to myself, there is the whole shadow, I love Latinas, Sonic, just being a constant meme during the past week regarding it, and Latios and Latias. So, anywho, I'm gonna try and get back on track without laughing. Latios, and by theoretical extension, Latias, should be just as important considering they share a majority of their base abilities. The difference is that we get to directly see how the lack of the Soul Dew from within Altomare will cause a great cataclysm within the city. Actually, to say it's just within the city is very wrong, because the waters completely leave the city and continue to recede into the distance before coming back in a massive destructive tsunami that threatens the lives of every person and Pokemon that lives in Altomare. The only solution was for Latios to actively reduce itself down to the Soul Dew and serve as the regulator and catalyst in this form. While I think anyone I've ever talked to that has seen this movie sees that Latios is dying, I'm pretty sure Latios is very much still alive, but is just stuck as an orb, unless he wants to see the entirety of Altomare get decimated and he returns back to normal. Luckily though, by the end of the movie, we do get to see multiple Latios and that singular Latias flying alongside them, so it's not the end of their species and gives us a strong idea of how there are multiple of both Latios and Latias, which, again, there's plenty of evidence of multiple of either of them in multiple different pieces of media, but that's something for another video, for another day. How many legendary and mythical Pokemon are there really? Rayquaza is a massive no-brainer to include here, but at the same time, many of our legendary Pokemon really hit Keystone species requirements, so I may be leaving some of them out as the most basic explanations, like Arceus and the Origin Pokemon are just like, yeah, without Arceus, nothing would exist. Oh, without Giratina, the Mirror Realm, and then our realm wouldn't exist, blah, 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 blah. I think you get it. But with Rayquaza here, there's one very special thing that the manga confirms, which is that Rayquaza actually releases ozone from its body as it flies. While this is explained as part of a plot point that tells us the fate of the Draconid lore keepers, which is that they are all destined to die, and that the great bond between the lore keeper and Rayquaza is necessary to help it reach maximum power against any threat, it's also said that these people sacrifice themselves up until the modern day, where we now have spacesuits to protect ourselves from this ozone being gifted all around its body. But Rayquaza's release of ozone, while also being Pokemon representative of not only the sky, but the atmosphere itself, shows us that it creates and maintains the ozone layer, effectively helping ensure that Earth continues to live and function as one massive, complete ecosystem without just getting burnt to a crisp. And that was just something I could not skip over. Torterra is a Pokemon I just recently talked about in my big video explaining the lore and inspirations of every starter Pokemon, so allow me to say here what I said there in part. Torterra's large and clean shell supports the lives of many small Pokemon, which occasionally gather and build their nests upon the shell. Some are even born and spend their entire lives there. They migrate in groups, searching for clean water, creating the illusion of moving forests. However, it is typically immobile. They are believed to possess unmatched physical strength, and ancient people believed the ground contained a gigantic Torterra living underneath it. We also get Torterra Garden within Pokemon Detective Pikachu, which grants us a sight unlike any other regarding this Pokemon. Massive, effectively incomprehensibly sized Torterra, Pokemon that have grown so large that it really does give us the impression that maybe the world of Pokemon, if we had not already seen it from space, could have sat upon a giant Torterra back, as per its inspiration being the world's turtle. Even if this isn't the case, then we might even still argue that Torterra isn't even just a keystone species, but is rather the embodiment of the ecosystem itself. Live, die, likely even be decomposed into Torterra's giant soil as it likely gets fueled and continues to grow larger and larger, which thus explains why it doesn't need to move around and it can stay immobile, because it is the ecosystem. Bidoof may be called the plump mouse Pokemon, but it is of course a beaver through and through, from gnawing on bark, chewing down trees, and even building entire dams as we see in Pokemon Snap. These Pokemon are just beavers looking for the tastiest leaves, and yes, beavers do have a preferred leaf to eat and will absolutely knock down a tree for it. Through all of these habits, they make a massive difference in an ecosystem, starting with chewing down trees. They're increasing biodiversity. As mentioned earlier, plants have just as much a chance of getting sick as any other creature. We just don't immediately notice it because they aren't coughing in our faces as we walk through the woods. But you might notice strange spots, obvious bumps in the leaves, orange markings, even new branches growing lower on a tree rather than higher up. These are all signs that a tree is fighting against something or is stressed by some external factor. The real problem, though, is when a forest is nothing but a singular type of tree, because then it means if one gets sick, then they could all get sick and pass away. Then comes in the mighty Bidoof, who chews down select trees. Some might be sick, others not so much. But either way, this now opens up a space for other types of trees to make their way in, increasing biodiversity. To follow, they aren't eating these logs that are left behind, meaning that other creatures can eat the wood, or alternatively, holes will begin to open up and provide shelter for small animals like mice or maybe even rabbits, which then ties in Rattata and Baniri. Any log or rock on the ground for long enough is also amazing for any insects to make a home inside of. And we already know that there are plenty of Pokemon that pretend to be rocks, hide inside of, or even under said rocks. Even if all this fails, the log decaying and building up moisture is going to be fantastic for growing fungi on. By all of this, the great Bidoof has already changed the lives of hundreds of creatures, even if for just a moment, just because it wanted some leaf. But we still aren't done yet, because Bidoof makes those dams, which, at least within Pokemon Snap, I can confirm for you that it makes a big difference. Because the water comes in from the greater bay and ocean, filters through the stream and into areas where other animals can partake in some sip. In the event that these waters rise due to rainfall, this dam is preventing an absolute overflooding of the area, keeping Pokemon safe as the water is slowed down. And because it's a dam that isn't exactly airtight, it's going to provide some level of large debris filtration while still letting water through. Finally, by slowing all of this water down, it lessens the level of erosion, keeping soil safe for longer, allowing plants to thrive and to actually take root to hold that soil better together, and for Pokemon to safely make homes in the area, and so much more than I can describe here. And I can nearly guarantee, based on the formations in the area, that this place has had some major rainfalls that enlarged the river and really eroded it down, emptying out into a floodplain that is now dried up and allowed many Bouffalant to make residence in. Bidoof is already well loved, partially as a joke and then seriously as people realize its potential, and also Bidoof's last or big stand. But I love it even more now because beavers are amazing when you start to look at these step-by-step cause and effect situations that happen naturally and how our Pokemon continue to reflect that. There may not seem like a lot of pollinators within the world of Pokemon, but the ones that we can find are incredibly vital. In this case, I want to look past Dedenne, Beedrill, and Vespiquen, and instead I actually want to focus on the best adapted towards pollination in all of Pokemon, Cutiefly. Cutiefly is capable of detecting the aura of living things such as plants, people, and Pokemon. It uses this ability to even predict the movements of its opponents. And this whole adaptation is so important because Cutiefly and Alola have arguably the highest population by comparison to other pollinators and are found all over the region. All of this for good reason, putting Cutiefly as a major reason as to why flora within Alola flourish so well. Because these adorable little guys are zooming all over the place, being very accurate and precise with what flowers they go to, because through their aura sensing abilities, they already know which flowers are ready for pollination on sight alone. This little friend is effectively helping farmers and plant life all around, and is even based on a bee fly, which is a dead ringer in terms of their design. I mean, we are talking some copied homework levels of inspiration because the bee fly is so adorable. They aren't bees at all and are in fact just flies, but resemble them in their looks and are regarded as very important pollinators. Although they are also a little creepy as they are parasitoids, which luckily they are very specifically choosing things like beetles as their hosts and not humans at all. Makes the whole situation where Cutiefly accidentally pokes humans a little relieving to know that we aren't being injected with eggs. I'm not entirely sure bee flies are keystone species exactly, but again, I can guarantee that Cutiefly is. Gabite may only be a keystone species specifically within the Haina Desert. It appears very rarely in the wild, and one thing we see in Haina is that it appears when there's a sandstorm and a Pokemon calls out for help. While we see Trapinch, we don't see any of its evolutions and instead see Krokorok, which is even more interesting considering that we know Flygon and Crocodile team up with one another to take down prey using sandstorms. So why aren't they here? Well, they simply don't get the chance to really thrive here and fully evolve into these forms. Their lines getting cut off by the presence of Gabite, who is the apex species of this route undoubtedly. The presence of a sandstorm already being used to conceal its presence as it attacks any prey is a major point towards understanding this, meaning that it's already adapted to sandstorms before Krokorok can co-evolve with a Flygon. In other words, just as Gyarados is a great example of a creature that will prevent other apex species from completely overtaking everything, Gabite fills the same niche, at least in this smaller area. I should also note that the only reason many apex species don't take over in their own right is also not because of other powerful creatures, but because of their needs not being met in order to hit that takeover event. This is because of what's called a carrying limit. Basically, if there's not enough food, water, or shelter to support an animal, then it hits its population ceiling and will drop from there. And more specifically, in the case of anything higher up on the food chain, the higher up you are, the more your population relies on the population of those below you. Can't eat what isn't there after all, and eventually you'll just starve. So yeah, Gabite is just a land shark filling in the same niche a regular shark would, just on land. Done. Munchlax and Snorlax together are phenomenal in the niche that they fill, because it all starts out with a Munchlax that starts eating anything and everything that it can, building up its immunity to poisons, molds, toxins, you name it. And once it can finally evolve into Snorlax, it's able to eat muck like it's nothing more than a bit of spice, which is insane when you think about it. Muck is literally the embodiment of being a living biohazard. It poisons fields for months or even years, and just touching one will result in your death. Yet Snorlax just eats it. Now, I won't get into the biology of that in particular, just know that thanks to Snorlax's metabolism, its habit of sleeping all the time, and its gained resistances from its time as a Munchlax over a long period of time, this is actually scientifically plausible. What this does, though, is it allows Snorlax to be the ceiling, to be a more passive, but still just as destructive reset button for an ecosystem. If there's anything in abundance, there will now be nothing left in its wake, making only the strongest and most adaptive of species in an area able to survive in an area with less food. This then results in lowered but more powerful populations of Pokemon as they fight for survival. And even humans are plopped onto the same war zone, as at least during the times of Hisui, Snorlax would raid granaries and leave villages destitute before winter would arrive. While all this sounds bad, it's serving one of the same roles as other Pokemon we've discussed. It's boosting biodiversity and getting rid of all the absolutely disgusting stuff that exists. It's eating diseased and sickened plants and animals. It's eating rotten food. It's consuming muck, which needs to be controlled, while also knowing muck is essential in its own way. I want to explain why muck is essential. Instead, there's a whole toxic ecology video all about poison Pokemon you can check out. Meanwhile, Snorlax is built to be almost as much of a junkivore as Guzzlord is. And I'm amazed more people don't make connections between the two of them more often. Not that I think they're actually related by any means, but they do fill that same niche. And they both do have a very strong digestive system, which, just realized, speaking of digestion, Snorlax poops. I don't ever want to come across that in the wild, but it must be fantastic for the environment. I would not have expected Hippowdon to be a keystone species, and while it is often depicted in deserts far away from water, it does in fact live in swampy terrains and still sits within savanna oases as depicted within Pokemon Snap. But to uncover why it's a keystone species, let's look to the St. Louis Zoo for their information. Hippos have profound effects on their ecosystems. As they walk from the water to their grazing grounds, hippos create well-worn paths, which neighboring animals can use. When hippos mow quote-unquote grass, they create hippo lawns, and other animals like gazelles benefit from the new green shoots that grow there. Additionally, when hippos return to the river, they help the fish who swim there. They defecate in water, and their tail acts like a manure spreader, shooting dung everywhere. hopefully you're not eating. Small fish, snails, and other little critters gobble up said nutrient-rich gunk. Everything here is a pretty strong match that we can see with only one exception. Hippowdon eats more than just marine plants. It actually even goes as far as eating other Pokemon on purpose, but not all of them. Drapion, for example, stays far away from it, so it is likely on the dinner plates, especially considering the type disadvantage, but smaller Pokemon like Dwebble and Torchic would not be, as they're just not worth trying to eat due to their small size. And not every animal functions in this way. Some will eat anything and everything in terms of prey sizes, while others will turn their nose at a rabbit and instead hunt something like, I don't know, a raccoon. What I love though is that Dwebble helping Hippowdon dislodge rocks from its body helps Dwebble as well, since it can then make a home in those freshly freed rocks, showing a mutualistic relationship between the two Pokemon. I'm also going to assume that Torchic is supposed to represent the oxpecker bird, despite it not being based on the oxpecker, because I can't figure out why else it would freely jump onto a Hippowdon without a care in the world, other than to eat maybe a couple of parasites that would otherwise bother our little hippo, which, not little, it's very, very big, very terrifyingly big. Pretty sure its maw can open up to 6 feet or more, and that enough is terrifying. There are many Pokemon such as Snover that do provide a great number of foodstuffs to other Pokemon. The problem is when other Pokemon become a little too greedy and start harassing Snover for their berries. Luckily, there are Abomasnow around to help defend their babies. To make it clear though, Snover have berries that they release that are packed full of nutrients, serving as an important food source for any creature living in colder environments. Not a lot to say about them since this one is pretty well known and very simple. Heatran is absolutely an important Keystone species because not only does it help provide and protect an entire volcano that it was born from, in the event that its magma stone is taken, then the person who took it is said to be able to control Heatran. This is all a pretty big deal considering it is said to be the embodiment of the planet's boiling core, birthed from the magma itself, and now serving to protect and maintain the quality of the volcano. Without the magma stone, Heatran will rampage and the volcano will get closer and closer to erupting. So on one hand, we have a very dangerous Pokemon that can act as a reset button when it goes boom, but when we look at the opposite side to this coin, we see all the different Pokemon that live in volcanoes. Coughing naturally occur, Slugma and Magcargo make their homes here. Magmar and so many other fire types are most comfortable in these blazing temperatures. But more than this, we can actually look at Pokemon Snap again to see all the other Pokemon that benefit from such an environment. Sure, there isn't a Heatran at Volucha, but warm calderas for Altaria can be found here, a home for Luxray and young Shinx, fire starters, and even prehistoric creatures making homes in environments like this, showing us that even a place as inhospitable to us is something that makes another creature very, very comfortable. This in turn, though, actually reminds me of thermal vents on the ocean floors, where creatures not only thrive in the high pressure and dark environments, but specifically make their homes next to thermal vents that release heat between 350 and 400 degrees Celsius, or 660 Fahrenheit to 750 Fahrenheit and higher, meaning that these super powered creatures highly adapted to these environments in Pokemon are so much closer to our real life animals than we might originally imagine. For note, also, the only reason the water doesn't boil thanks to these hydrothermal vents is thanks to it being so far down with high pressure, and the ambient seawater all around is just shy of freezing temperatures. Moving on though with Pokemon, it's suspected that any active volcano could have a Heatran in it. So then we can see that even with a handful of Heatran, they are providing homes for many Pokemon with profound effects on the ecosystem that they effectively are creating. While we don't really see wild Oshawott anywhere, they are otters, and by God, I am not skipping talking about otters and how they are Keystone species without a doubt. Provided by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I bring you the following. The sea otter functions as a keystone species in the environment through its role as a top predator in the near-shore marine ecosystem. Sea urchins are a favorite food of the sea otter if they are locally abundant. By preying on sea urchins, a voracious consumer of kelp, sea otters keep urchin populations in check, which allows kelp forests to then thrive. Healthy kelp forests in turn support greater species diversity and are highly efficient at sequestering carbon, which helps reduce ocean warming and acidification. What's interesting then further is that within Pokemon, Pincurchin is the only sea urchin Pokemon, which it's also an electric type. but there are other Pokemon it can help keep in check, like Shelder and Clamperl, who may overfilter if their populations hit too high and cause other forms of environmental damage. Also, to be entirely fair, type advantage, type disadvantage isn't the be-all, end-all. There's a lot of Pokemon that do manage to fight and defeat each other despite these advantages and disadvantages. Again though, not a lot of in-world evidence to talk about for Oshawott, since starter Pokemon aren't really seen in the wild, but if you love otters, then now you have even more of a reason to love them. I'm pairing Levani and Chansey together as they fit the same exact niche together, and not only do we read about it in their dex entries, but we even see in the routes that they appear on that they help protect baby Pokemon. They don't just protect their own species, no, they protect all sorts of baby Pokemon that are non-aggressive towards others. In the case of Levani, it states that it will clothe other Pokemon and attack anyone or anything that harms young Pokemon in general. Very nice and simple. Meanwhile, for Chansey, we already know that it is a caring Pokemon thanks to its role within Pokemon Centers, but when we look at one route in particular as an example, being 209 in Sinnoh, we see a slew of baby Pokemon alongside it. Mime Jr., Bonsly, Ralts, all within the original games, all being children or babies, and their parents being nowhere around. We do not see this little congregation anywhere else in the region, only where we run into Chansey do we see it, showing us that they are purposefully placed together to show off the motherly and caring nature that these Pokemon have. Well, I say motherly, but Levani is at least a 50-50 male or female, so it's good to see strong parental figures in either scenario for it. This isn't uncommon in the natural world either, this whole idea of different species taking care of other species. There are tons of scenarios we see in the wild, and even in special cases in which parents have found themselves caring for similar species or entirely different species altogether without it being a brood parasite situation. For one example I bring to you from the International Fund for Animal Welfare, it actually genuinely shocked me. Though lionesses have a reputation for being strong, fierce predators who do anything to protect their young, it turns out that maternal instinct can sometimes extend beyond their own cubs. There have been multiple instances of lionesses adopting young, orphaned animals. In 2002, a lioness in northern Kenya made worldwide headlines after she was spotted cuddling up to baby antelopes, a species she would normally prey upon. Within a few months, the caring lioness had adopted 5 young antelopes and was seen lying down next to them to ward off any would-be attackers. A similar story spread in early 2020 when a 2-month-old leopard cub was adopted by a lioness in India. Even though these two species are normally at odds, the lioness, who had her own cubs the same age, spent weeks nursing, feeding, and caring for the leopard until he died. I wasn't ready for that. According to scientists who flocked to observe the rare situation, she treated him as if he were her own. There are other examples such as whales, dolphins, primates, sloths, and as fun as it would be to believe that there was a chihuahua living with a pack of wolves at one point, it's that one's not real. That one is impossible, has no supporting evidence, and of course was proven to be fake. Somewhere deep inside, I could just feel someone in the comments being ready to bring that up, and I have to be the person to snipe it down before I get a slew of comments about it. Nevertheless, our natural adoptive parents of the Pokemon world are amazing and help make sure that we don't lose entire species of Pokemon to overly aggressive predators and absent parents of their own species. Also, I got ever so slightly emotional during that. You probably don't see it, you probably don't hear it at all, but man, I felt the tears welling up in my eyes because it's just such a beautiful thing to think about. Like, animals and creatures within our world are not as strongly segregated as we usually think that they are in our mind, and that there's so much more malleability between relationships and how they behave, and how so many times we get so much flack for saying we're anthropomorphizing animals and their ideas and their behaviors, when in fact there's so many different examples of this not being anthropomorphized behaviors, but rather just being true things. The best example I can think of at this exact moment is when geese call out when they come back. That people thought that they were calling out because they were missing the people, or they were looking for the geese that they left behind. And other people were like, that can't be the case. That's stupid. You're dumb. They're geese. They don't have a soul. They're evil and they will eat you. They'll bite your ass. But it turns out when they really dug into it and did the research through many different examples, these geese were calling out for the people or the geese that they left behind. And that is both sad and beautiful all the same, and let's move on. Another one I want to keep short and simple is actually a pair of giant centipedes known as Scolipede and Centiskorch. These two are incredibly rare to find in the wild, and for good reason, as like the shark and the bear, they are controlling populations and contributing to ensuring there is good biodiversity. They're both incredibly aggressive Pokemon through and through, eating anything in their wake that they believe they can hunt. And of course, this then leads to the two of them being rivals within Galar. You can't have two Pokemon filling the same niche in the same area, otherwise you're gonna have trouble. Same thing goes for any other animal. So they stay pretty far away from each other and only clash occasionally when they do cross paths, all while actually serving as Pokemon that regulate each other's populations because they're so aggressive, which I think that's really neat. As stated in the intro, Maractus is a major keystone species within any desert it lives in, and is actually the inspiration for why I wanted to do a video like this in the first place. Its body that sounds like a maraca, hence its name breaking down to maraca and cactus, Maractus, is actually full of seeds that will then release throughout the desert. These seeds are known to be nutrient-rich and serve as a precious food source for other desert-dwelling Pokemon. This extends to birds that may pass through the desert as well, allowing Maractus to have a massive impact on the greater world around it. When looking at the desert resort during my Ecology of Unova video, I can tell you that Darumaka, Scraggy, Dwebble, and Sandshrew all take their fill of seeds among some of the other foods that they consume. In addition to this, we do find Maractus in a number of areas within Galar, showing just how resilient it is and how important it is really in any harsh environment as it provides to other Pokemon. This all relates to the Saguaro cactus, which you may have heard pronounced as Saguaro even by me because I only recently learned how to pronounce it, which is Saguaro, and considering it is native to Mexico, we may have the primary inspiration being this cactus for Maractus. The saguaro is a keystone species that provides food and shelter for many desert animals. Saguaros have hundreds of flowers that bloom several per day from late April to early June. The flowers open at night and close the following afternoon. Lesser long-nosed bats visit the flowers at night. Birds, mostly white-winged doves, and insects, mostly honeybees, visit the flowers the following morning. The fruits mature in June and early July. The rind splits into 3 or 4 sections that then peel back to expose the juicy red pulp embedded with up to 2,000 tiny seeds. The fruits ripen during the peak of droughts in the early summer and are about the only moist food source for many birds, mammals, and insects during this part of the year, which means something that you may not know is that a lot of animals may not even get to really drink water. Instead, they get all of their liquids from the food that they eat, meaning that Maractus in this capacity and the saguaro are providing food and water to all of these animals and all of these Pokemon. So through and through, they are incredibly vital. And without them, there'd be a lot of dead Pokemon in deserts and a lot of dead animals in deserts. So there's nothing more to say other than thank you to Maractus, a Pokemon that many people probably forget exists, but I won't. The buck that represents summer, autumn, winter, and spring, that's why it has the sauce, Saucebuck, is in fact a keystone species despite what I said earlier about some deer being invasive. Both can absolutely be true at the same time, once again, depending on the environment and the conditions in place. From Graham in the Missouri Department of Conservation, deer help shape the wild places where they dwell in many other ways. A deer herd roaming a territory can influence species, types, and abundance, plants, trees, and animals that people might see when they explore the outdoors. Deer are food for predators and scavengers. They provide nutrients for plants. Antlers shed by bucks in late winter are chewed on by field mice, which are preyed then upon by owls. Deer are a keystone species, a species capable of profoundly affecting an ecosystem. And this is likely exactly what happens with Saucebuck, as while it does have the grass typing, it is not in the grass egg group, meaning that it simply has some sort of symbiotic relationship with the many seasons of foliage that grow upon its body. This is made most evident by its spring form, stating that the antlers grow slower because the flowers are taking energy from them in order to make the flowers themselves grow. This isn't a bad thing, clearly, as each of the different forms serve different purposes in regards to camouflage, attracting mates, even serving as teas when we take leaves from the summer form. Not too much to say here other than tying it to real deer since they're fairly one-to-one. I am pairing together, or rather grouping, nearly every single mushroom Pokemon because they all contribute to biodiversity, while also being some of the only creatures that help decompose dead flora and fauna. I say this with the utmost confidence because while you might get a number of entries stating how Pokemon will ferment leaves or serve as general cleanup crew for our environment, we have zero confirmation of any Pokemon that outright says it eats other dead creatures. And no, ghost Pokemon do not count. They are alive, again, by the standards of Pokemon, considering they do consume energy in some form with very, very few exceptions to that. I don't blame the Pokemon Company for not saying these things outright, that, Pokemon eat corpses, considering it's a bit too graphic to imagine a Pokemon like Fearow scavenging the bodies of others. But it, amongst many other Pokemon, absolutely are built or are inspired by cadaver-eating creatures, including many of our mushrooms, of course. And of course, in the cases of Pokemon such as Parasect and Toedscruel, they are tree parasites, with Toedscruel having the added-in diet of hunting for prey species. Easily, though, the most vital of all mushrooms might be Morlul and Shiinotic, who I have mentioned in so many videos at this point that it kind of makes me wonder what the most commonly mentioned Pokemon in my videos across the board might be. Either way, these fungal friends give back to the forest rather than completely take from it, as they absorb life energy from creatures that they target and restore forests with said energy. They serve as the antithesis and rival to Parasect, serving to keep forests in places such as Alola lush and happy, to help provide for many Pokemon, even when such an invasive species crab walks its way into an area. Also, I say that even though Parasect isn't a crab and is just likely a cicada at the end of the day, likely even being related to Nincada in some capacity. Which that immediately leads me to realizing that cicadas are yet another potential keystone species in some places, according to Brookhaven National Laboratory, amongst other sources. The label is given in particular to the brood 14 species of cicada, which are also called the Pharaoh cicada, as they seem to buzz the syllables of the word Pharaoh. Cicadas will feed on roots while living deep underground, not killing the trees at all as opposed to their more aggressive parasite counterparts. Though through this, they are still providing levels of biodiversity while aerating the soil, leaving behind their molts, which enliven the soil with nutrients, and overall serve as an often hidden provider and foundation to the ecosystem. They give to many creatures, be it mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and even other insects. In addition, with all this tunneling, we find that Nincada would also be providing new avenues for water to travel through as it aerates the soil. This not only gives water to plants that need it, but also helps ensure that water isn't horribly logged in one singular place and causing rut rot in plants. So, just about every species can thank Nincada for their hard work. The big and brave Braviary is a keystone species that strongly supports its allies through very aggressive behavior, though this does still come with a price because at the end of the day, this is a bird of prey and an apex predator. When we look at eagles in the real world, especially the bald eagle that it's inspired by, we of course find once again that they fit our mold of being keystone species. They primarily feed on fish, but will also scavenge carrion or prey on smaller birds and mammals, meaning that they're even contributing towards keeping the biodiversity of bodies of water in check and cleaning things up. Through all this, they are of course again keeping the health of the ecosystem in check through eating these carrion before they can spread disease, and despite all this, they became an endangered species due to hunting, habitat destruction, and effects of pesticides like DDT. Their populations are coming back, or did come back, as they have been officially removed from being an endangered species since 2007 thanks to strong efforts, and this has in turn resulted in higher quality water in the areas that they inhabit, though work still needs to be done to ensure their long-term health from here to the rest of time. Who would have guessed though, when you have less fish pooping and decaying all over the place due to overabundance, the quality of water goes up, which I know the plants are also happy about because without so many fish stirring up the water and sediments and blocking out the sunlight, they're getting, well, more sunlight. I will argue day and night that the Swords of Justice are keystone species just for the fact that they prevent humanity from waging war all over Unova and destroying nature. Something that I often don't include is how humanity fits into the ecosystem, and this is one of those few times that I can't just disclude them, because without these legendary Pokemon, more than just the Moor of Icarus would have been destroyed. Since that time, they have continued to serve as a trio of Pokemon that will absolutely stand against humanity whenever they deem necessary and put humans in their place, which, God, I wish on a genie, or I would wish on a genie if you ever give me the chance, for one to just be real. One of these Swords of Justice, all three of them. Give me all three. Give me Cobalion at the very least. Just so that way they can go to a generative AI company, like, building and just obliterate it off the face of the earth. God, we would need a Cobalion right now, and we could use one. Moving on to Florges and its entire line, which can be seen as Keystone species through their special mutualistic symbiotic relationship with flowers. Because while Flabebe and Floette might rely, or rather will rely, on the flower for their overall health, while also taking care of other flowers, it's when we get to Florges that we get a species that supports the well-being of our pollinators through love and care of flowers. Florges in particular care so much for fields of flowers that they have been known to ruthlessly punish anyone who vandalizes any garden they lord over and continue punishing them even if they beg for mercy. They have been noted to live for over 300 years, and in times of need, it can synchronize with flowers through different wavelengths to draw forth the energy they have and blast foes with powerful beams of light equatable to an artillery battery. Then, it of course gives back to those flowers, helping them grow and in turn providing nectar and pollen to the many different species that rely on them for food, such as Combee and Vespiquen, shown best within Pokemon Snap once again. To see that pollinators and flowers have this living, mutualistic, and commensal relationship with one another is something that's always really fun to see in this semi-anthropomorphized way that I don't think I'll ever get tired of. Along the same lines, we have Trevenant, who serves as a guardian of the forest that they reside in. Once again, they not only protect small Pokemon from danger, but they also do their best to protect forests from humans. Their dex entries talk about hating fire Pokemon and being considered a major threat, but this was all just a way for greedy lumberjacks to convince the public that Trevenant should be gotten rid of, thus resulting further in fire-type Pokemon being used against it to take over a forest as they are pushed out. Of course, this only agitates our treants and results in the entire forest turning on our villains of the story, trapping them within it to wander until the end of their days, or worse. This extends further than just humans though, as I'm confident that any invasive species or overly aggressive Pokemon would be swiftly dispatched by Trevenant's power as it continues to protect the forest to the best of its abilities, making a safe home for all that live there. Going further than this, there are even Pokemon that do make homes inside of its body. What Pokemon those are, we can only speculate, but I have a few ideas. Because not only can we expect it to be birds or rodents, but maybe even Esper, as they're seen having a very friendly relationship with one another within Snap. Also, something I realized is that Trevenant has its signature move, Forest's Curse, which turns others into grass types. This is something I've seen before in a game called Golden Sun, a game that turned me to JRPGs and did so much for my life. Goodness gracious, a great deep love for that. But in that game, there were people in a place called Colima who have been turned into trees by a massive treant in a forest nearby, and it did this because they were given orders to chop down a ton of trees, and in fact too many trees, which, oh god, Trevenant might not be trapping people, it might just be transforming people into trees, which, that's actually incredibly kicked. Just earned this Pokemon so many more brownie points in my book. Nice and simple, without Diancie, then the entire Diamond domain will fall apart and all the Carbink that live within it would likely not only lose their homes, but also lose their lives. It's made very clear that Diancie lives within a crystal kingdom, and that there are likely many different Diancie throughout the world that we're just not aware of. But they settle down around a massive diamond called the Heart Diamond that sustains the land and provides the kingdom with energy and tranquility. In more direct terms, it's likely driving away Pokemon like Sableye that are looking for this motherload of gems to grow fat on. Kind of a massive deal. Even more of a big deal when there's assumedly only one Diancie at a time, meaning that when the Diamond Heart starts to fade, it needs an incredible amount of power to become whole and fully powered again. This results in a full story, and movie rather, on how Diancie gains its Mega form from Xerneas directly, and then she proceeds to provide that energy to the Diamond Heart, restoring it to its full glory and providing back to her people for hundreds of millions of years to come. While many different crabs may be defined as keystone species for aerating the soil and being a major food source amongst other traits, I actually want to focus in on Crabrawler, which serves a very unique trait amongst all of our crab Pokemon. It makes piles of fruits. More than this, Crabrawler actively punches trees to make fruit fall from them, gathering piles and piles of this fruit in competition against others of its own kind. And there's no information stating that they even eat all this fruit. In fact, I would be willing to argue that there is no way they eat all the fruits that they drop from the trees around them. This then allows other Pokemon in the area to take advantage of the bountiful amount of food, feeding them in place of the stomachs of Crabrawler, who are more focused on competing with each other. I would also add in that time and time again, there's bound to be fruit that just splatters on the ground and spreads seeds in the immediate area. Plus, fruit is meant to be eaten. It is meant to attract specific species that the plant has adapted to attract to it. And then these seeds are undigested and instead spread through the poop of all these different creatures to allow the plant to spread and grow throughout the lands. Another keystone species in Alola is what would be endemic to Hawaii, the honey creeper, a vital pollinator specifically adapted in each of its different forms to feed from and pollinate different flowers in the form of Oricorio. Directly from Pollinator Partnership, we are provided the following. Hawaii's isolation has given rise to numerous endemic species, such as Hawaiian honey creepers. Currently 17 species remain, with more than 50 species historically. Also, bear with me in the next part, as I am generally terrible with speaking Polynesian for their native language names of species. I have been partially taught, and I have not practiced, so I am sorry. Hawaiian honey creepers are attracted to red, orange, and purple flowers with ample nectar and tubular shapes. Aligning with their sensory preferences, the iwi's curved bill is perfectly adapted to accessing nectar from the tubular flowers of the Ohialehua. Definitely said that wrong. This mutualistic relationship ensures that the plants are pollinated while providing a food source for the birds. Which, doesn't that sound familiar? Red, orange, and purple? Though instead of orange, we get yellow and pink, but hey, it's already obvious what the inspiration is with Oricorio anyway. This does all become very clear though, as Oricorio changes its typing based on the nectar it drinks, immediately adapting its behavior and physiology to be better fit towards the flowers that the nectar belongs to, showing their symbiotic relationship to be even stronger. Here's a good one most people likely already know, also because it's on the thumbnail, Wishiwashi, who for some reason I always imagine with the wimpy voice from the old comics. No idea why. That is not my era, but it's there. Anywho, Wishiwashi is a Pokemon that sits at the very bottom of the Pokemon food chain, theoretically, but also sits at the very top as long as we don't include Pokemon like pseudo-legendaries and above, which gets messy from there anyway. But anywhere that Wishiwashi might exist are also places that have incredible numbers of this Pokemon. Their impact on the ecosystem as one of the most abundant water-based food sources is nothing to sneeze at. In fact, the Moon Dex entry states, it's awfully weak and notably tasty, so everyone is always out to get it. As it happens, anyone trying to bully it receives a painful lesson. Now, last part, of course, alludes to its school form, which only happens when Wishiwashi is of the right level, experience, and there are enough Wishiwashi nearby to properly trigger it. This school form is noted to be their special school form, meaning that this Pokemon still moves in schools as any other fish would to confound predator species, and then has this additional adaptation. This creature, as I would expect you to know, goes from the easiest target of the watery world to a Pokemon that outclasses Gyarados so effectively that Gyarados would rather run away than face what is known as the Demon of the Sea. It does make me wonder, though, why this shape? Is there a past predator of Wishiwashi that looked like this and that it's mimicking? Could they have originally held an evolution that they have now lost and are just mimicking it through genetic memory? Nobody knows, but it's something that, kind of just crossed my mind and I can't not bring it up. This single and school form shifting is an amazing adaptation, not just for self-defense, but also for self-regulation of the ecosystem. There isn't a single other Pokemon that actually does this whatsoever, not in Pokemon, and actually no animal in the real world either. We might claim prey species might fight back, but Wishiwashi doesn't always fight back because it can't. But with enough pressure, it can call upon a school of its kind to shift from the bottom to the top and prevent literally every single other creature out there from eating it as they want to for at least a while as their numbers repopulate. That's just something that nearly brings a tear to my eye when I think of all the places that are also overfished by humans and need to be restored, as the fish themselves are then able to fully fight back. As a tangent, after some documentary watching, there's places that are implementing no fishing zones, and when the populations boom in those zones, then the fish explode out to other areas around those zones, rebuilding and revitalizing the area, even giving us more fish than we can catch, while also healing the ecosystem. Fish and plants just aren't thought of enough in conversations about all this, and maybe I need to just have another video about the watery world of Pokemon sometime soon. Oranguru and Passimian are two Pokemon that are seen as opposites to each other, not just by typings, but also through how we get them in opposite games. Yet despite this, they are both Keystone species that are massively important for seed dispersal in their own unique ways. This also extends out to their real-life counterparts thanks to their diets. Both orangutans and ring-tailed lemurs are omnivores, but they also both eat a varied diet of different fruits or plant species in general, allowing their poop to work as seed dispersal, as we've discussed many times. In similar manner, we find that Oranguru is able to help lead and command other Pokemon with its intelligence. In the lush forest, we once again find the prime example of their abilities, as Oranguru would help lead the other Pokemon, especially Trumbeak, as they could help find the best places to plant seeds whenever it isn't just eating them. Then with Passimian, their whole thing is that they throw fruits and berries around. They eat, play, and even fight with berries, and you bet whenever those berries crash against other Pokemon or trees, their seeds are shot all over the place and will serve to grow into more of our flora in the future. Why is the lush jungle just so cool? Why is Alola so cool? Why has it taken like over a decade for other people to just start coming out of the woodwork and start appreciating the region and the anime? It's just ungodly how amazing it all is, and it's hard not to gush about it every single time, especially with the whole lesson behind the power of Alola in the anime. That needs to have its own video, and I'm gonna move on before I keep gushing. Wimpod is directly called Nature's Cleaner, a moniker not given to any other Pokemon within the franchise whatsoever, so far at least. It is a true omnivore, eating anything and everything that hits the ground and scuttling away at high speeds to ensure its own safety from others. It isn't seen very often, but they are hardy creatures, considering we also get to see them in Galar. But more than this, they're supposed to be Alola's primary natural biological cleaner. Now you might be asking, but Krillin, I thought Alola and Grimer and Mach were supposed to do that, and you're right. But they are for man-made or chemical-based messes. That's why the original Grimer species was imported and naturalized to the region. Meanwhile, Wimpod is the OG. It has been here since the beginning, but could not stand up to Pokemon like Trubbish and Garbodor, who had overpopulated in Alola, because it's just not meant to fight other Pokemon at all, at least not until it does evolve into Gliscopod, but then its behavior changes dramatically. Wimpod is partially an isopod in inspiration, which, say it with me now, are considered a keystone species. They are crucial decomposers, accelerating the decay of organic matter and cycling nutrients. That's a nice way of saying that they eat food, then poop it out in easier to digest forms in order to allow bacteria and other creatures to have their go at it. And ultimately, because of this, because they break down leaf litter and plant detritus, they do support microbial activity and support soil fertility. I think it's actually highly recommended that if you can get some of these guys near a compost pile for your garden, you will be thriving. But I'm not 100% sure how to keep them safe around it consistently, so I haven't tried it yet myself. As a tangent, I have this like really long log in my backyard. It's like 4 feet long that has just been there since we moved in, and I refuse to move it anywhere else. I picked it up, pulled worms that were easily a foot long from under it, and put them in my compost, which was exciting as all get out for me. For my fiance, who does not care for creepy crawlers at all, it was not nearly as exciting, but she was there to watch anyway, so I appreciate her support. Much like otters eating sea urchins, Bruxish serves a role in preventing Marini from over-congregating on beaches, and also prevents them from eating too many Corsola. This is not only because they are rivals, but also because Bruxish will absolutely eat a Marini given the chance. Which I will say that whole relationship is very weird because, like, again, despite being prey, Marini and more of a Toxapex actually will actively square up to Bruxish to fight it. It will literally travel to wherever Bruxish lives on purpose to fight them, rather than just staying away or trying to defend itself whenever Bruxish appears. So, yeah, At least a one-sided rivalry, I'll say. Bruxish does go further than this though, because as it stays under the sediments, it will leave that protuberance on its head out to sense its surroundings. Its presence being so vibrant is both benefit and detriment, so it needs to do this in order to ambush prey before they see it from a long distance away. But if it just wants to keep other dangerous creatures away, it just shows off its incredibly vibrant colors and releases psychic energy. And as such, this is why they are kept around beaches by humans, to scare away any other dangerous Pokemon. Totem Pokemon are absolutely a special case of Keystone species, but not every single one of them would fit into this mold. For example, the invasive Alolan Rattata and our introduced invasive species of Gumshoos would not be Keystone. But in antithesis, I bit my tongue. But in antithesis to this, we have each and every one of the other totems that really serve their environments in full capacity. And while I could talk about them, again, whole Alola ecology video that you can check out for those details. The same can be said about the Tapus for that matter, as they are so intrinsically tied to nature and the power of the natural world itself. Obstagoon and the rest of its line are not only noted to be the originating species for Zigzagoon in other parts of the world, but they are also noted to be the best adapted to the shifted climate of Galar in its harshness, and are, of course, Keystone species, thanks to the addition of it being partially inspired by the European badger. From Restore Our Planets, I bring the following. As omnivores, their diet includes earthworms, insects, small mammals, fruits, and roots, contributing to the regulation of the invertebrate populations and the dispersal of seeds through their fur and droppings. Their burrowing behavior brings air to the soil, promoting plant growth. Moreover, abandoned badger sets provide shelter for numerous other species, from foxes to rabbits, highlighting their significance as Keystone species. Despite their nocturnal habits and elusive nature, badgers leave a tangible mark on the landscape, evident in the intricate networks of tunnels and chambers that comprise their underground homes. These sets, often passed down through generations, serve as vital refuges for badger clans and contribute to the overall health of the ecosystem. Archaeological evidence suggests that badgers have inhabited the British Isles since the last ice age, making them one of the oldest surviving mammals in the region. This actually then makes perfect sense now as to why Galarian Zigzagoon survives all of this. I didn't know that until this video, and it just, boom, all comes together. The colder shifted climate, the crazier weather, its adaptability, all of it just points back to one of their real life inspirations, and it's amazing. The only other real thing to add in though is that because of its adaptability and being noted to have hit this peak of staying with the changes, it is of course an apex predator in its own right, while still being an omnivore. So you can put this in that mental category as we have had with Pokemon like Sharpedo, Scolipede, so on and so forth. For our semi-finale, we have Dondozo and Tatsugiri, Pokemon I almost skipped until I read something very specific about our big catfish Pokemon. Basculin is among the species Dondozo preys upon. Now, Basculin is a very aggressive, high population, quick reproducing Pokemon that easily becomes an invasive species that threatens water quality and biodiversity wherever it may be. At least the red and blue striped versions of it are this way, not so much the white striped ones. Knowing Dondozo is noted as one of the biggest Pokemon discovered, and that it is a heavy eater, it is, as many others are, serving to ensure biodiversity and keeping the ceiling on populations of species all around. The only downside is that it is a terrible hunter and isn't very smart, so in turn Tatsugiri jumps onto its sushi platter of a tongue and commands it from the inside, using it as a biological mech to fight and catch prey that the two of them can then share between each other. And of course, it's good to see that a very gluttonous Pokemon like Dondozo, who is also very strong, is not capable of hunting on its own and needs a more intelligent ally. Otherwise, we'd be running out of food real fast in this here lakes that it exists in, meaning that these guys are fairly self-regulated until we got that false dragon titan version of it with that Herba Mystica, which we resolved anyway. I've mentioned Pokemon Snap multiple times throughout this for a very big reason, and that's because Illumina Pokemon within the Lental region are all Keystone species handpicked by the origin of Illumina itself, Xerneas, and they are our finale. This whole phenomenon gets wild, but it can be broken down to an abundance of life energy being given to Pokemon without it inducing Mega Evolution, and then still causing gigantism as we see in many other regions where Pokemon are filled with excessive power. These Lumina Pokemon are the center of their islands, creatures that provide back to the entire island in so many ways that without them, not only would the islands likely eventually collapse, but they also serve as the protectors of the islands in the event that another cataclysm were to occur. Whether it's the Illumina Meganium that brings flourishing life to a massive slew of flora on Florio Island, or the insanely large Illumina Steelix that creates tunnels for every Pokemon to live in that aims to escape the cold area above on Durice. I genuinely don't think there's a single other Pokemon that can really compare to these Illumina Pokemon in terms of their massively disproportionate positive effect on the ecosystem as Keystone species. Without the Illumina Pokemon, these islands would not be here. But there's far too much for me to talk about regarding the ecology of Pokemon Snap and its islands here, so I highly recommend and encourage you to watch that video and all the beautiful footage I included from it. But with that, we've covered all the Keystone species of the Pokemon world, though I do say that with a little bit of an asterisk. I have a strong feeling there are many more that we might consider to be Keystone if we look at them in just the right way with just the right lens, and who knows, I might need to do a follow-up video on this in the future. For now though, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you made it this far and are new, you've just spent over an hour with me, so you might as well subscribe and spend a couple bit more amounts of time that's unspecified. In addition, do let me know what Keystone species I missed. I love reading those comments, and they're also a great way to appease the algorithm, alongside liking the video, sharing the video, and hyping it. If you'd like to go the extra mile and get behind the scenes content, early access to videos, and members only videos, become a member for as little as $3 a month, like these guys going across the screen right now. There are already 2 videos out now that are members exclusive, one of my Evil Team's rankings, and one of my personal journey through Pokemon ever since I was like, 5 years old. Lastly, the best comment from this past week was from a guy named Rex, who says, I remember hearing that Haxorus swings its long neck around in a way reminiscent of giraffes, and the way they swing their necks for mates and territory. Not to mention that many creatures with tusks tend to compete as well. It wouldn't be surprising for Haxorus to compete in the same way. And yes, 1000% yes. Not only does that actually make sense to me, and I'm amazed it never came across my brain sponge thing, but giraffes are my favorite animal of all time. One reason why they have such long necks is also not just because of reaching high leaves, but because they swing their massive noggins around. And that gets heavier and heavier as they become denser and more able to take a heavy impact. And instead of getting a thicker neck to support a continually thickening skull that gets heavier and heavier, they instead got longer necks. Gotta get that momentum swinging in there. This just hit a big old button for me, and I've hardly mentioned Girafarig and Farigiraf in videos, and now it's just a mighty need to do so. But anywho, that is all for today. So as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time.